Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2026 cycle info session for the applications. This will cover both the pilot and developmental awards, so you'll be able to get a comprehensive picture, and I'll have time for a Q&A at the end as well. So no worries there. I'll make sure to leave plenty of time. So we'll get the presentation pulled up here. Make sure I can see some people. Is the bar showing at the top or just the presentation?
We can just see your presentation slides, Savannah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I didn't want it to block anything. All right. So first and foremost, I wanted to give an overview of some important dates in the rest of the timeline. So as you saw from my email that I sent out and the RFA as well, these preliminary applications will be due August 21st, 2026, and you will give those applications to me completed in a PDF file, and you can email them to me by the end of the day. If you have any issues, please let me know ahead of time so that I can work with you if there's like one final piece that you may be missing or something that got delayed. We can see if we can work together on that. And then they will go to an external review. I'll cover this a little more on the next slide as well. And we'll have the decisions back to you from that review by October 19th. And those will be the decisions of whether or not your application will then be moving forward to NIH. And that final submission of your application materials to NIH will be January 15th, 2027, and with awards expected June 30th or July 1st, 2027. So just getting, again, that overview of the process, you'll be submitting this preliminary application, and we call it preliminary because um, there are not human subjects materials required at this time. So like your human subjects or clinical trial paperwork, your IRB, IBC approvals, that's not required for this phase of the application process. We typically wait until after the external review to prevent you from doing a lot of extra work before knowing if you're going to need it when moving forward. You're definitely welcome to start working on those materials if you'd like, especially if you know that you'll have a complex IRB or have a lot of questions when working through that paperwork. But it's just know that it's not necessary for right now. And then when we have your preliminary applications, we will send them to 2 to 3 external expert reviewers, and they'll conduct an NIH style review. I'll go over a bit of that review as well in this PowerPoint. And then based on their scores and comments, we will do our own kind of secondary internal review or consideration of their comments and then rank the applications. So then the top 4 to 5 pilots and 1 to 2 developmental projects will then move forward to NIH submission. At that point, since it kind of confuses people sometimes, at that point, so long as you get all the materials acquired that are necessary after that point for NIH submission, you will get approved. Of course, dependent on NIH's review, they might have some comments that come back as well, but typically people that make it past the external review will get funded by NIH. And once you know if you're moving forward, that's when we'll, contact you about completing the rest of those human subjects, paperworks, or other approvals that are necessary. So, just to go over what I sent on Friday, because I know that was a bit of a hulking email with a lot to go through. Um, I sent you a list of application components required for either the pilot or developmental, a blank application scaffold, a link to the fillable application forms, a link to the common form biographical sketch instructions and how to get that filled out. Same thing with the current and pending other support documents, and then a redacted model pilot grant. And we'll walk through each of those now. So for that list of application components, you'll notice that I made it a number list. You can use it as a bit of a checklist. Make sure you have each of the necessary files. And I included the titles of each form because I'll show you when we go to the link for each of these forms. You'll be able to then very easily know which ones you need to download and fill out. So the face page is required for everyone. So is the summary, relevance, your senior key personnel, detailed budget for the initial budget period. For the pilots, this is going to be your only budget form. For developmental projects, you also need to include a budget form that covers the entire period since those projects are 2 years long. So you'll have an extra budget form after this one. And it's important to note that each site needs to have its own budget form. So let's say your primary institution is UND and then you're partnering with Sanford. And wherever money is flowing, there needs to be a budget form for that institution or clinic. It just makes it easier for our internal grants offices to be able to differentiate what money is flowing to where. And then you'll also give a detailed budget justification, and that'll itemize everything that's in your budget form, give a little bit of explanation, and the subawards versus the primary institution amounts. And we'll want you to include the percent effort for all of your team members, total direct costs, the indirect costs, and the total cumulative costs from each institution, direct and indirect. And then you'll have your biographical sketches for all the COIs and the PI, of course, current and pending other support documents for each of them as well. And then you start your research plan, and this is the meat of your application. This is really what gets focused on in the external review. They'll also be looking at, your bio sketches, for the team members to make sure that everybody there has the experience necessary for this project. But this is really where you're going to be talking about your project and your approach and why it is meaningful. So these guidelines that I give, like well, I guess I'll start from the top. So the response to review, you don't need to include that unless you are resubmitting from a previous cycle. There you'll want to talk about what you changed to your application to strengthen it. And it can be anywhere from half of a page to a page. And then you have your specific aims being 1 page. The research strategy, it's 3 pages maximum for pilots, and then 6 pages maximum for developmental. That does not include the citations. Those are external from that maximum. And these page suggestions that I have are just that. They're suggestions. You might want to give a little more time to the significance, but just be aware that it'll take away from other portions of your research strategy. In the significance, you really, really want to, well, rather, you need to clearly discuss the relevance of your project to North Dakota populations, specifically why that research is particularly important to North Dakota versus elsewhere in the country. This was missing from some LOIs, and you will be scored on that aspect, so be sure to include that. And then if you are aligned with TRANSCEND's research priorities, be sure to talk about that as well. Again, that was not required. It's just we are prioritizing projects that do align with those priorities. So it's in your best interest to do so. Then innovation and approach. There's a little blurb about kind of what you want to include in that approach and really emphasize that clinical and translational nature of your project. That will be a point for scoring as well in the review. Then, of course, you have your bibliography and references cited, your vertebrate animal section, if applicable to your project, consortium, contractual agreements, if applicable. That's again, like say your UND partnering with Stanford, you'll want to get that agreement filled out. And then letters of support from the following. So your basically your direct supervisors for the PIs and the co-Is, just to verify that you have the time out of your regular work commitments to dedicate to this project, and consortium participants confirming collaboration. So let's say you're working with a small clinic, you want a letter from them confirming that they're going to work with you on this project. Your senior and key personnel, so co-Is writing to the PI that they are committed to this project, and then any other significant contributors, say mentors that might be aiding you. The resource sharing plan, if applicable, authentication of key biological and or chemical resources, if applicable, and then a checklist page. And these are the links to web pages that I included in that email. So we have first the fillable application forms, as long as it opens. So this is where you'll find all of those forms that I listed. And there's the fillable PDF or Word format, whichever works best for you. And you'll see the names here again to check cross-reference with that original list for which ones you'll need. And also at the top here, there's a PDF with instructions. So it gives some more in-depth information on how exactly to fill out each of those forms. And then we have the biographical sketch link. So all of these forms, well, the biosketch and then the current and pending other support, those are completed through Science CV now. And it gives you some information on how to sign up for that. You'd click that link here, and there's 3 different ways to log in to Science CV. You can use your Commons ID, you can use Orchid, and if anyone needs some help with accessing those forms, just let me know. Um, there's also instructions for completing the forms here, and it's the same thing with the current and pending other support forms. And then I included a blank application scaffold. It's really a visual representation of all the components, so you can just visually make sure, am I getting the correct forms? Also, which order I would like the forms in. It just makes it easier for me to find things, see if you're missing anything, to check what you've sent me. And please do not edit the scaffold just because it'll mess up the forms themselves and you won't get the proper, I guess, like font size, and like space restrictions for that. That might cause NIH to get upset. So I'll just pull up that scaffold really quick here. And you'll notice too that at the top of each form, I list which cores can help with completing the form. Sometimes it's just going to be your institution, and it goes through the entire thing so you know what needs to be where. Just another way to just another way to verify and check your list of items. Okay, and then I included a redacted model pilot grant. Unfortunately, I don't have a model developmental project just yet, because we only just put those through for Transcend, so I will work on getting that to you. It was well scored in the external review. It can give you an example of the level of detail to include, especially in your research plan, portions of your application. Do note that this was before the bio sketches and the pending support or the other support forms switched to common form. So you're going to see the old format there. This was also after the external review. So there's an introduction to the application that talks about, what this person changed in order to strengthen their application. And I think it can be insightful so that you can see, what were the reviewers looking for more of. You can see how it's filled out, the level of detail in the project summary, and the relevance. And then here's that introduction to the application. And then I have a then I have the NIH style review template. I can send this all to you as well. I did not have it edited in time for Friday, and I wanted to get you your notifications for your LOIs as soon as possible. So this is the guideline that's given to all of the external reviewers, and it's based off of NIH's actual review template as well. So it gives you a chance to see what NIH would be looking for from you. You can use it as a reference and to evaluate your own application. Are you hitting these marks that you should be? And the highlighted portions are the review priorities that we have. And I'll send this all out in the email. I think with the email where I include this video, I think would be easiest. So it talks a little bit about, the scores. The lower of a score you have, the better your score is. And then going into kind of each of these sections, what are the reviewers going to be looking for? And I think this will be really helpful to just make sure you're hitting the right points and including enough detail. And you'll notice that your budget does not get included in the overall score for your project in the review, basically because the budget can shift a bit throughout the application process. And also because if you're selected to move forward, that's when you'll submit to Novolution or for some other institutional review where they will look over your budget and give you a little more feedback there. So we don't want to knock you for, just not having all the information you need for your budget. And then I also pulled up some institutional grant writing resources from UND and NDSU. I know that Sanford has the project managers that can help as well with, grant writing or how to fill out certain forms. So for UND and NDSU, a lot of these are also just public resources, so you don't need to worry about having an account or being NDSU faculty to access these. Some of these you do, like there's a writing center at NDSU that is available to members of the university. But like this first link here is from UND, and there's PowerPoints and videos on giving you some information for proposal writing, making sure that you have a hypothesis that's being tested in your project. I think just really good resources that are helpful to anyone, especially in this time, before you meet with the cores or even afterwards to see if maybe there's some way that your questions can be answered here. But never be afraid to ask us if you have any questions. We are here to help. On this page, you'll also notice there's some other information here that might be helpful, like filling out that face page where it asks a lot of institutional information. That's here. NDSU has similar resources in their links that I provided. Um, some help with the forms as well for UND. There's a budget tool that'll calculate totals for you and give you some help. Um, Again, there's writing centers here. There's classes as well and schedules of classes that might be helpful. So none of these are necessary, but definitely good resources. Some final notes as well overall. Jamie, who's our navigator, and the RDCDC are available to review drafts of your applications. And it can be just separate forms, it can be your application as a whole. Definitely take advantage of that, please, because in previous cycles, reviewers have said time and time again that applications could have scored much higher if they just had a little bit of feedback on their writing, like the grammar, the completeness of their concepts, just having an extra set of eyes on it, especially eyes that have seen many an application, will definitely benefit you. And then the same has been said for the power analysis, and that's to determine a significant sample size for your project. Applications are really heavily impacted by missing or inadequate analyses, and we have Mark here, Mark Williamson in the RDCDC, and he can look those over for you. Just scheduling a meeting with him, shooting him an email, he can make sure that that aspect of your project is covered. Also, in um, recent cycles, NIH has been sending back applications with some words to be edited or removed. And I have those listed here. It's not a comprehensive list, just the words that have been flagged so far for us. Try to avoid these words. Of course, inclusive is up here, but if you use it in the terms of like, we are inclusive of women in this study, that's not going to be flagged because in context, you're just using the word as is. But in a recent case, we had inclusive recruitment flagged, and you're able to do some wordsmithing sometimes. Like we changed that to population reflective recruitment, and that was okay. So just be aware of those. Good to avoid just so you're not having to make those changes later. So the next step for everyone, and a lot of you have already gotten to this point, is to schedule the meeting with the cores. And I included a Calendly link in that email. I also have it here. I'll also send these slides out to everyone so that you have them for you can access those links. This is going to be a meeting with each of the Transcend cores represented via the coordinators. It fulfills the requirement that's laid out in the RFA that you need to meet with each of the cores to discuss your project. The dates currently go through July 31st, but if you just can't make any of those dates work, please let me know as soon as possible and we will get a different date and time scheduled for you. This is going to be an opportunity to discuss your overall project and any assistance that you might need. Although, if you are in need of a collaborator, please contact Jamie ASAP because the earlier we get started on that, the better for you because it takes time to get responses from people sometimes. You can also schedule other meetings ahead of or after this meeting, especially if you couldn't get your meeting scheduled until the end of July. It's just a good opportunity because all of the cores are present and it makes it a little easier for everyone to coordinate and stay on the same page. But we are here to help. So any other meetings that you want to schedule, we are here to do so. And with that, that's all the information that I have for now. Thank you for your attention, and we'll start taking any questions that you might have. I will be watching the chat as well if you'd rather type in your question.
I have a question. This may be a little too granular for the group, but just I think on slide 13, you were showing some of the suggested avoiding wording.
Mhm.
If I would imagine our center's proposal and maybe others is centered around targeting like rural populations that are by definition underrepresented and underserved. I guess I'm just curious how you describe that. Is the word rural okay to use? Is that like what we should be using instead of underrepresented or some of the other examples you had?
Yes, so rural has been fine. Um, what we have been told to do is just to be specific. So if you're talking about, you know, underserved populations, you might want to say rural populations. If you're working with indigenous peoples, you might want to list the tribes that you're going to be looking into instead of um, using more vague language. It's definitely something where if it's like a particular phrase you want to use and you're worried about it, I can contact our admin core and they can talk to our NIH liaison during this time and just double check, especially if it is something that's going to be used frequently throughout your application. We can definitely do that for you just to save a headache. I see a message in the chat. I wonder until what stage of the application process is it possible to change the principal investigator if needed? So you you'd want to have the principal investigator and the research team in general solidified by the time you submit your preliminary application. So by that August 21st date. Just because at that point it goes through the review and we want things to be solidified. Unless there's a big issue that comes up, we could work with you at that point. But since the investigative team is factored into the review, it'd be important to have that, laid out.
And I just throw a comment in there related to that.
Mhm.
I would suggest changing that as soon as possible that the PI on your grant needs to change because it could change the primary institution the grant would be routed through as well. So to give institutions proper notice to know who is submitting at what and make sure timelines align, I would just do that as soon as you know that you need to switch the principal investigator.
Thank you.
Is the maximum budget a 100K per year budget? For the pilots, it's 75K for 1 year, and that's total. So that's your direct costs and then whatever your indirect cost rate is. So for UND, it's 41%. Sanford has their own, NDSU has their own. So you would want to be careful with that and make sure you leave enough room for the developmental projects. It is 100K in total costs per year for 2 years. So 200K total for those. And then I see what clinics in North Dakota can PIs be from. Um, so as far as definitely if they're Sanford, they can be PI. As far as other clinics, we would need to check to see if we have an agreement of collaboration with them. If we don't, there might be a way that we could establish one during this time right now, but that would definitely need to be established as soon as possible so that we can work to see if that would be achievable in the short time frame. I should, I do want to mention there are a few projects where there are, you know, the PI is a co-I on another project or vice versa, and that is okay for the time being. Just know that, um, let's say both of those projects score highly at the external review mark, you would need to choose one or the other because the PI and any co-Is can only be receiving money from one grant at any time.
Can I clarify that on that, Savannah?
Yeah.
Could could they reduce the co-I on one project to a lower title, such as like a key personnel instead of a co-I? Would that be acceptable if these are funding completely separate projects and there's no salary support?
No salary support, definitely. Yeah. Um, I think now I think about it, in the past we had a similar issue, and I think so long as I would have to double check with our admin core because this was an issue from I'd say 2 years ago now, where there might be a way to allow somebody to be getting money, but they get it as a consultant cost or a flat fee rather than like a salary. So that's a good point. I can clarify that.
Okay, yeah, I think it comes down to if that those individuals are being paid by the grant or not, and what the purpose of the
Mhm.
projects are. But I do think to clarify, there is a way for a PI to be a collaborator or an investigator on another individual's grant.
Any other questions for now? All right. Then I think we're good here. Thank you so much for your attendance here and your attention. And any questions that come up after, this meeting, if you just think of one, don't be afraid. Just reach out to me. You can also reach out to any of the other coordinators. And if there's a question that needs to go to somebody else, we all talk to each other very regularly, so we will get you to the right place and the right person to answer that question.